hurling to reflect on Dublin against Kerry last weekend and select some football teams of the year with the ex-Derry player Conleith Gilligan and the GAA writer from the Irish Independent Donnchadh Boyle. Conleith and Donnchadh, how's the form?
Very good, John. How are you?
Great to speak to you, lads. And Conleith, we're going to start with you. Did Dublin deserve to win the All-Ireland final against Kerry last Sunday?
Yeah, I think on balance they did. It was a game that looked like it was going away from them, but it was just written in the stars. The players had all come back, going for 9, some of them going for 9 All-Ireland medals. They just weren't going to be denied, and as good as Kerry were in patches, they just couldn't hold out.
Donnchadh, this will be a painful defeat for Kerry to take, because you felt that last year they'd broken the Dublin stranglehold on winning these type matches back to 2011, and now it's the case a year later that they've lost their All-Ireland crown to their biggest rivals.
Yeah, I think it will sting from that point of view, and very much because it felt very much like a transitional game for both those teams. Would Dublin squeeze one more out of that great group, and they have, or would Kerry go on and take over and establish themselves as the dominant team? And now we just don't know where that stands, because there's so much to decide between now and when the championship starts next year. But just painful one for Kerry, considering that they shot themselves massively in the foot with that goal in the second half, which in real time, maybe when they re-established a 3-point lead, that it felt like they didn't have to, that they had ridden out that storm. But I think it did. Jack O'Connor said afterwards, it told in the last 5 or 10 minutes, and I'd agree with that. I think Kerry kind of ran out of steam a little bit down the home straight.
2 points in the last 25 minutes is all that Kerry scored. By the way, Celtic are now 4-1 up against Ross County on the opening day of the Scottish Premiership season. Conleith, we all need to give David Clifford a break and calm down and stop hailing him as the greatest of all time, whether he will become that or not. He's a brilliant Gaelic footballer in an amateur sport who had an off day. Maybe we all need to just cool it and remember that it's not professional sport here that we're talking about.
Yeah, there's probably an element of that. But David Clifford was nearly man of the match. He was nearly the winning captain. He was nearly footballer of the year. And it all hinged on off the post, dropping a wee bit wide, things that were uncharacteristic for him. He still had a good game, but by his standards, people were talking about him being a wee bit off. People then talking about Mick Fitzsimmons for man of the match because Clifford had an off day. Look, I think it was a case that Clifford was just probably under too much pressure. The ball was wet. Everything that went for him against Derry, been really well marked against Chris McGuigan, just didn't go the same way. And look, I think he will be the greatest of all time. But again, that'll come down to the fact how many All-Irelands will he win with this Kerry team. But in terms of what an individual can do for one team, like, he's out there on his own, and it was just inches from being a magic display for him in another All-Ireland final.
Donnchadh, would you see it as the end of the road for a lot of these Dublin figures, these heroes in the capital? Michael Fitzsimons, James McCarthy, Dean Rock, Jack McCaffrey.
Well, I suppose reading between the lines on Dean Rock, you would say that he didn't quite commit to it, but he did accept that these could be his last acts as a Dublin footballer, and what a career. Looking at Mick Fitzsimons and James McCarthy, like, it really comes down to their bodies and their desire. Maybe their lives are moving on, they're chasing different things, but like, if Dublin played again tomorrow, both those boys are in the team without a shadow of a doubt. And there's a few others in that, Stephen Cluxton as well, and we'll talk about all these lads later on. So it'll be interesting to see, because it does very much feel, and we talked about it a lot in the build-up, it does feel like last dance sort of stuff, that this was the group, the gang getting back together for one more go. Didn't feel like that. Now, whether they're happy with what they have or whether they get emboldened by that win and how they won it is really up to them. But there's no reason why that Dublin setup at large can't stay together. It comes down to personal decisions now that we'll find out over the next weeks and months.
Would you expect Dessie Farrell to stay on, Donnchadh?
I wouldn't be surprised if he goes, personally. I think he's done, with that second All-Ireland, I think he's done brilliantly to get it out of that group. He would have long personal relationships with an awful lot of that team, going back to when they're under 13, 14, the McCaffreys, the Kilkennys, that group of fellas. So, I'd imagine they'll all inform each other's decisions over the next few months. That if Dessie was going again, that group in particular, I think, would be very eager to go with him again. But maybe, Jack McCaffrey came back and feels like he's done what he can do. Maybe Paul Mannion's in the same boat. They weren't giving much away in the post-match stuff. I watched a lot of it, I read a lot of it. There was no one with any real definitives. So it's a case of watch this space, but I wouldn't be surprised if Desi said, you know what, I've done what I came here to do. And like, he had done so much work in the background of building that 6-in-a-row team with those great underage groups that he put together. So his contribution to Dublin over the last 10 and 15 years in the management sense has been extraordinary.
That's nothing new. Dublin players don't tend to give a lot away, and that's been the case for quite a few years now, I've found. Let's pick our teams of the year, have a bit of fun with it. Conleith, it's unfortunate for Rory Beggan and Shane Ryan, two excellent goalkeepers, and Oran Lynch as well, that Stephen Cluxton, you can't not pick him now as footballer of the year in the one position, whether he's going to be the footballer of the year for the overall team, but he's got to be the goalkeeper, does he, or do you have a different view?
He doesn't have to be the goalkeeper, that's the first thing, but Shane Ryan has had a brilliant season. Probably statistically, Shane Ryan has been better. But when it came to the big games, when Cluxton came back, and probably one of the moments of the year was sitting, watching Louth in Dublin, and all of a sudden Cluxton's in the warm-up. Nobody heard about it. It didn't seep out. It was just an incredible moment. But yeah, look, I think Cluxton will get the All-Star. Other years, he probably deserved it more and didn't get it. So I think on balance, Stephen Cluxton will get the All-Star, and I think no one will begrudge him for what he has done and what he's been able to do.
So he's in your team. He's your number one, is he, Conleith?
Number one. And look, as people mentions, Beggan, Oran Lynch, who had a bad end of last year. Like, I thought he was sensational. His ability to get points from play, probably the Kerry game wasn't the greatest in terms of being out the field, but I thought he had a brilliant season and he improved from last year as well. So it'll be a notable mention for him as well.
Donnchadh, who's your number one?
I went for Cluxton as well, but I actually think it's one of the toughest decisions to make in the 15. Like Shane Ryan, you can make the case that against Derry he actively saved Kerry's season. I don't think Stephen Cluxton had to do that at any point, as good as he has been. Like, Kerry would not have been in the All-Ireland final without Shane Ryan, and he gets forward and does all the things a modern goalkeeper does. But I went for Stephen Cluxton because he didn't concede a goal. He retained 100% of his kickouts in an All-Ireland final, and you can make the case that maybe Kerry didn't press as well or as intensely as they should have. But to get, I think it was 23 off the top of my head off in an All-Ireland final in skippy conditions. That's extraordinary at 41, 42 years of age. That's incredible. So I've just gone for him, but Shane Ryan has a strong case.
This is the full-back line picks now. Conleith, this is your chance now to start getting Derry players into the team. Yeah,
look, and as you'd expect, but I think McCluskey really deserves one. I think he took his performances from last year and he's built on that. Not only was he defensively brilliant, he was probably marking arguably the second best forward in every single team. But it was his ability really against Monaghan in the Ulster Championship to really show where Monaghan were weak, and he absolutely killed them and probably saved Monaghan's season as a result, because Monaghan knew they had to change after that. But look, I think McCluskey, he carried a serious amount of ball, his energy up and down the field. For such a young player, whenever Derry run to the cosh, he was the man that kept breaking lanes, kept getting the ball out quick. So for me, look, I think that McCluskey is a very worthy cornerback. So
he's in there with who? Fitzsimons and somebody else?
He's in there with Mick Fitz. I think that final performance will get him an All-Star. And I think if it is his last one, what a career he's been. And after that, for me, it's Tom O'Sullivan. Again, what he done in previous games and in the final as well. He scored 9 points from cornerback. Like, that's just off the scale. And I think generationally, has there been a better cornerback in the last decade? There probably hasn't.
Donnchadh, who's your full-back line?
Yeah, I've gone the same as Conleith. Conor McCluskey, just for, I suppose, how he's developed into, I suppose, one of the leaders in that team, and his ability to break lines, get forward and mark men. Like, I think against Kerry he tracked Paddy Clifford, and that shows you the esteem he's held in the Derry setup, in a group of very good players, that they give him responsibility as someone like that, because when Paddy Clifford plays well, Kerry generally do too, and they gave him McCluskey, and I thought he did very well that day, and maybe in the build up to that game, people were talking about him in the broader context, maybe the nationally, he's been mentioned because he played full back in that minor final where David Clifford got 4-4, and I think he's carved out a real reputation for himself this summer as a proper footballer. Mick Fitzsimons as well, very good All-Ireland final again. I agree with Conleith, he probably get his All-Star on the back of that. But the most extraordinary thing for me is that he was marking David Clifford, one of the great talents, 12 years after he marked Colin Cooper in the 2011 final. I think that's just testament to his ability, to what he's made himself. And his story is well known, from the Coola minor B team to, being entrusted with Dublin's man marking jobs in a team of very good defenders. And Dublin still looked to Mick Fitzsimons, and did all the way through his career. There was a short period at the start of Jim Gavin's time when maybe he was on the outside looking in for a brief period, but otherwise he's been brilliant for Dublin over an incredible career. And Thomas Sullivan, I just had a look at who he's marked over the last few days. It was Niall Loughlin against Derry. He had Derek Hanavan, and Derek Hanavan was singing his praises as a man marker. And I think Tom got 2 points that day, and then Cormac Costello the last day. Thomas Sullivan is nailed on for me.
Okay, you're in great minds thinking alike mode at the moment, lads. Conleith Gilligan and Donnchadh Boyle.
I have a feeling that will continue, John.
Well,
I'm very glad I'm getting going first, and then I'll be accused of copying.
Yeah, absolutely. Duncan change then when he hears you. Is this the line then, Conleith, for a Monaghan player, the halfback line?
Yeah, look, it has to be Conor McCarthy. Against Tyrone in the first half, Monaghan were absolutely a beaten docket out the gate. They move a few switches. Conor McCarthy goes to wing half back. He's so versatile, and then everything just explodes from there. And he just took that on. And against even Armagh, whenever the game was under pressure, he was the one that kept carrying the ball forward, kept getting on the overlaps, kept kicking the points from ridiculous angles. And I think he has something like 211 in this year's championship from play, which for a half back is savage going. And while he didn't play there all the time, he didn't neglect his marking duties. And I think whilst finals and semi-finals do dictate who gets the big awards, I think if there is one outlier from a team outside of Dublin, Kerry or Derry, it would be Conor McCarthy for Monaghan. And on the other side, there'd be a notable mention for Charles O'Connell as well, who really brought Monaghan forward whenever they looked really under pressure from the Derry game onwards.
Who are the other then halfbacks for you, Conleith?
Yeah, well, look, obviously my own club mate Gareth McGinless. For me, I would have him in. Politics might dictate that him or McCluskey or somebody doesn't get one, but look, I think everything was good about Derry's display, and as a one-off singular display of football, the game against Kerry, where Derry was struggling a wee bit up front, and he kept breaking lines and breaking lines and breaking lines and creating overlaps. And I suppose the big chance he had that was saved by Shane Ryan, which nearly got Shane Ryan an All-Star, had that went over the bar, I think Derry would have done and win. But his displays of bravery were just incredible, and for me, he may not get one officially, but I think he has to be up there for that one. And on the other side, look, James McCarthy is going to get one, probably in wing half back based on where he was playing, even though he was out the field a lot. He'll get one, and deservedly so. And Gavin White will probably be the player that'll be most aggrieved who may miss out because of that. We had another brilliant season.
We're going to get different selections from you in the half back line, Donnchadh Boyle.
I think Conleith might have been in my house this morning looking at my notes. I've gone for the same.
What? You picked Gareth McGinless and Conor McCarthy?
I picked Gareth.
He's all got a holiday in Ulster now for the next few years, lads, are you? Jesus. Anybody hear of Tyke Morley or John Small? No.
No, I thought Gareth McGinless was absolutely brilliant against. The All-Stars and team selections like this are always weighted towards your final game of the season. It's heavily weighted. I thought Gareth McGinless was absolutely sensational against Kerry. Got that goal. And he's been doing it for years as well. Straight through the middle, heart of the defence, punching holes, getting on the end of things, starting things. Derry have a very established, settled group, but I would say that when Kieran Meena goes to pick his team, I would say Gareth McGinless is one of the top 3 or 4 names on the team sheet that goes down. And either side, Conor McCarthy, 211 from play, as Conleith pointed out, from wing back. I've seen him a lot in Scottstown and County finals, and he's hit by his skill set, and even to an extent his size, you think he's a forward, he's an out and out forward, he's made to be a forward, but he's very much a product of the modern game, and that he needs to be somewhere where he can get space to shoot. And I think Monaghan have done well to reinvent him, and he's done really well to reinvent himself as that player, because he doesn't shirk his man marking duties either. And James McCarthy, there's not much left to say about him. The Mayo display was probably the high water mark for him. He was extraordinary. He was getting close to the levels of his performance against Kerry in the All-Ireland semi-final. With some heroic stuff there. But yeah, he's my other wing back.
Okay, is it a no-brainer, lads, for midfield? Brian Fenton and Brandon Rogers, would you agree with that, Conleith?
Yeah, look, I think that's a given. Again, Brandon Rogers very much like Conor McCluskey and Gareth McKinless. Whenever Derry's forward line at any stage wasn't clicking, wasn't happening, it was those three players who got going forward, got making the overlaps, got making it easy for other players around them. And when chips were down, Brendan Rodgers always delivered for Derry. And I think Brian Fenton, by his own standards, that battle with Jack Barry was just massive, because going into that, if it was going to be said that Jack Barry had Brian Fenton's number again in another big game at Croke Park, well, it would have probably dented Brian Fenton's legacy, which sounds absolutely ridiculous. But he put that to bed. He had the game of his life in terms of the big moments. You know, he wasn't brilliant throughout, as he always does be, but the big moments, the point in the wet, into the hill, under pressure with about 10 minutes to go, was probably the thing that gave Dublin the energy to push on.
Listeners out there, you can text us 53106 if you have any view on what Conleith Gilligan, the former Derry player, and the Irish Independent GAA writer Donnchadh Boyle are saying in terms of a team of the year for Gaelic football, with the dust just settling on last weekend's All-Ireland final. Only one Kerry player so far in the first 9. That might cause some ears to pick up down south. The half-forward line, Conleith Gilligan, who did you go for here, the top 3 there?
Well, obviously the forward lines now are more fluid. For me, Shane McGuigan gets in there, and I have him in at wing half forward. He did play a bit of football out the field, but it's to get him in. You know, top scorer in the All-Ireland, no doubt Derry's talisman, and he's a shoe in for me. You know, Sean O'Shea, when the game needed winning against Derry, whenever things weren't just going, he was a player that single-handedly in that second half dragged them through, as he does all the time. His leadership qualities, his free kicking off the ground, 212 in the championship, is a big return. And then the other one, it's like Paul Mannion to be man of the match in the final. Paddy Clifford a brilliant year, but I think Conor O'Callaghan's contribution from play was probably what made me put him in there, instead of Clifford or Mannion.
Right, interesting. So Shane McGuigan, Sean O'Shea and Conor O'Callaghan for Conleith Gilligan in his half-forward line. Donnchadh Boyle, who do you like in the half-forwards?
Well, just for the record, I had the same midfield as Conleith, but I'm happy to say in the half-forward line, it's just
on that, because it seems such a foregone conclusion on the basis of what we saw, and that Fenton and Rodgers would get in there, isn't it, Donnchadh?
Yeah, well, I think to some extent, and the point, Jamesy's point on Tony Kelly in the hurling conversation was well made. I think to some extent Brian Fenton is a victim of his own creation. He's set extraordinarily high levels, and in the same vein as David Clifford, he's been talked about, is he the greatest midfielder of all time? It's him and Jack O'Shea that people are talking about now. And by those standards, I would suggest that he wasn't at that level until down the final stretch of the Monaghan game, where he took over that game and he did more to win it than anyone else for Dublin. And then I thought he was brilliant in the final too. So he timed his run perfectly. And then Brendan Rodgers, the body of work he's put down from the start of the year, if you go back to that league game in Celtic Park when Dublin, Derry beat Dublin, I thought he was extraordinary that day, and he basically didn't stop until the end of that All-Ireland semi-final. So I don't think there is plenty of arguments to be made across this team, but I do think those two boys are fairly secure. And
your half-forward line then, Donnchadh, is?
Paul Mannion, again, another late run, but 5 points in the All-Ireland final. It can't be argued with. I've Sean O'Shea as well. I think Sean O'Shea, if he was in a different team, he would be talked about in very different terms. I think he'd be the talisman for most teams, but obviously with David Clifford, he maybe doesn't get the attention he might in another team. But apart from his talent and his kicking, and he can play. He played inside a lot this year. He was very effective. He can play out the field. He's great attitude, great work rate, great tackler. Edgy enough, like soft-spoken fella, but edgy enough playing football. I saw him against Louth. Kerry were absolutely tearing Louth apart, and he was snarling around the place. He's just a lot more of a competitor maybe than his persona might belie. And then I have Paddy Clifford the other side. Paddy sort of quietly, in that All-Ireland semi-final or All-Ireland final, he kicked, I think it was 3 points in the second half. Kerry he was really had his hands to the pump when the game was there and on the line. So Paddy gets in.
Okay, so we have so far Conleith, Dublin 5, Derry 4, Kerry 2 and Monaghan 1, and Donnchadh Boyle, Dublin 5, Kerry 3, Derry 3, Monaghan 1. So your full forward line, Conleith Gilligan, is?
Yeah, well, look, it goes without saying that David Clifford gets an out of 14. And then probably this is where it gets the most controversial if Shane McGuigan gets into a corner, somebody else gets out. But like, I think for the year he has had, other than the semi-final, Colin Basquel has been incredible. From the game in Nolan Park where he almost single-handedly ripped Kildare to shreds all the way through. Didn't have a great first half, but his second half was so telling. And it wasn't about how many touches he got in the ball, but every touch he got was telling. He turned over for the goal. He kicks a couple of points. So for me, Colin Basquel gets in. And I think, Tom O'Sullivan gets an all-star because he keeps Cormac Costello quiet, but I still think Cormac Costello's contribution whenever a lot of the other forwards in Dublin weren't clicking was massive, so I went for Costello, Clifford and Basquel.
Right, okay, and Donnchadh, what have you gone for?
Well, David Clifford, obviously, All-Ireland final aside, I don't think there's ever been a build-up to an All-Ireland final centred around an individual like that in the way there was in the build-up to this year's decider. So he's obviously nailed on. I've gone for Shane McGuigan in the full forward line where he played the most of his football. So I've just top scorer in the championship. Derry's go-to man when it comes to scores, and I think the game against Kerry was a big one for him too, because he got loads of attention, got loads of heavy attention in that game, and he still stood up and I think it was Jason Foley that day, and Jason Foley's very unlucky not to make this team, but give Jason Foley plenty to think about. And the last one was, it came down to Basquel or Costello for me, and I've gone for Basquel. He was brilliant against Mayo. He was, I think, first man off the pitch against Monaghan. And then at half-time in the All-Ireland final, you're thinking, will he come back out? And if he does come back out, how long will he get? And he came back in the second half and he turned the game around. He won that turnover and played a very important role. And, he top scorer from play, 5-17, and has his best season at 27. And in some ways, he might be Dessie Farrell's greatest sort of coaching achievement of the year. I covered Dublin's very first game of the year down in Baltinglass, and Colin Basquel was pretty much the only name you'd recognise on that team. It was effectively a Dublin under-23 selection, and Basquel was by a distance the most recognisable face on that team. So that's where he was at the start of the year, and to finish the year with that second half in an All-Ireland final full house, I think it's an extraordinary achievement by Farrell and by Basquel himself, because he's been knocking around for a long time, had to be very patient in a team that had generationally good players, and he gets his rewards this year.
Very good. Okay, so Conleith's team is Stephen Cluxton, Conor McCluskey, Michael Fitzsimons, Thomas Sullivan, Conor McCarthy on the left, James McCarthy on the right, Gareth McKinless centre back, Brian Fenton, Brendan Rodgers, Shane McGuigan, Sean O'Shea and Conor Callaghan the half forwards, David Clifford at full forward with Colin Basquel and Cormac Costello either side. And Donnchadh's team, Stephen Cluxton, Conor McCluskey, Mick Fitzsimons and Thomas Sullivan, the same back four as it were, and then McCarthy, McKinless and James McCarthy. Both of you picked the same goalkeeper and defence and midfield. So it's really midfield, and the only difference is in the forwards. Mannion, O'Shea and Paddy Clifford for you, in the half forwards Donnchadh, David Clifford, Shane McGuigan and Colin Basquel. Footballer of the year, does it matter, Donnchadh, if a player's had a good final or not? So David Clifford and James McCarthy arguably didn't have good finals, but they're definitely in contention for Footballer of the Year.
I think it's the single most deciding factor usually over the course of the award, is that generally players who have a bad final game or a poor final game, they don't win the Footballer of the Year. But for me, David Clifford was so far ahead of the posse going into the All-Ireland final, and there's no doubt that he did not have a good day. But I'm not sure anyone else did enough to overtake him. I'm not sure anyone else came out of the pack to put their hand up sufficiently to say, well, I'm in the conversation here. So I've kind of stuck with David Clifford for what he's put together overall. It's not a vintage year for Footballer of the Year. There's been years when there's been no conversation required. I accept there's a very strong case being made against him. But as you say, James McCarthy was okay in the final. He wasn't brilliant. If you had to maybe put down a Mayo type performance, you would say, yeah, he's very much. And the other thing about James is he was probably lucky to stay on the pitch in the final as well. So if he had to pick up a second yellow card, I don't think we'd be having the conversation about James at all. So those are the small margins that these things swing on. So I've stuck with David Clifford because I just don't think there was enough to overtake him in any of the rest.
James McCarthy should have won it before Conleith, I feel, and maybe 2017. He was unlucky not to win it. If he gets the award, it's almost a legacy thing for his amazing career, 9 All-Ireland wins, the captain this year. But does it mean he gets it this year? Is he your choice?
Yeah, look, I agree absolutely with everything Donnchadh said. It wasn't a vintage performance in the final by any stretch. His performance in the Mayo game was massive. Probably moment of the year for me may have been David Clifford lifting the cup in the Munster final, having just lost a parent, and everything went after that. So I think for everything that David Clifford's been through this year, coming off the back of an All-Ireland club final as well, look, I think with the pressure he's been under, and no one player has carried as much burden on his shoulders, and I think for that alone, he's my footballer of the year for sure. I wouldn't begrudge Jim McCarthy if they do give it to him, because it may be a legacy thing. It may be something that he can look back on and say, well, I've deserved before, and it would be fitting. And I think the other person in there would be Brendan Rodgers if you were go to 3, and that's not me with my Derry hat on. I think just based on performances alone in a team that weren't firing on all cylinders at certain times, he was the one piece of glue that kept everything together. But yeah, look, I think David Clifford, is my player of the year, but who would begrudge, probably one of the best players of their generation, and James McCarthy.
It's not too dissimilar to the hurlers. It was very similar actually. John Bubbles O'Dwyer and James O'Connor picked the same 13 players, and you both have done the same. Conleith Gilligan and Donnchadh Boyle, you both picked the same footballer of the year in David Clifford. Conleith, how do you feel the championship played out as a whole? Was it a successful season for the GAA?
Yeah, look, I think it was. I think there was those poor games, obviously, and there's obviously recency bias. So when you get to the semi-finals, you kind of forget just how underwhelming the quarterfinals were. I think the last day of the round robins was incredible, but it did mask up some poor games prior to that. But going right back, and I suppose when we're looking at all-star selections, sometimes the team that wins the league can sometimes have somebody in there, and I think kind of Mayo's really good early form has all been forgotten about there. But I think coming off the back of a really good league campaign for all teams, I think the league was brilliant. Into the championship, it wasn't the best championship ever, but there was probably enough in it. Last year, everybody wanted a new winner. They got Kerry. Again, they wanted something different. Now they've got back to the future a wee bit in Dublin, and I think it's probably really good, and it's as good as it's been in terms of teams that potentially are looking at this going, we could win this if we get everything together, and we'll have learned from last year. The Ulster, and if you look at, I suppose, what the Kerry team and the Dublin team have had to get to a final, and you put that up against what Derry have had to do in their provincial championships, it probably has been a very different competition.
Are Derry feeling that maybe next year might be the year? Because it did feel from the semi-final last year to this year that they did progress. They scored more, and they're right there, you feel, for next year.
Yeah, they are, and I think if Derry had had a couple more players a year older, maybe a year more experience to bring off the banks, that were going to really add to what Derry were doing. And I think Derry missed the likes of an Emmett Bradley from Glen, who stepped away from the panel to get married. If they had somebody like him to come in to that midfield, into that half forward line, could kick from range, he's one of those players. So I think Derry have to add to their panel for sure, and they have to get some of these under 20s, some of the minors, right through onto the highest level they can be. But I think Derry in the conversation, they're definitely in the top 4 moving forward. And this year, the difference for Derry is that they're playing in Division 1 week in and week out, and that gives them a better barometer for where exactly they're at. Because it took to the Dublin game in the Division 2 of the National League before Derry ever got tested. And in the first 20 minutes of that test, they failed miserably. And then the second half, they turned it on. So I think Derry will have learned a lot from that, and I think they will learn a lot into the season coming in. And they may take a different view on what the Ulster Championship is going to mean to them, having won it back-to-back. Do they really want to put all their eggs in that Ulster Championship basket again? I'm just not so sure that a lot of teams will this year.
53106, James in Longford in touch. Out with Paddy Clifford, in with Brian Howard. Where did all of Cluxton's kickouts end up in the final? Only for Howard. Most touches in the final, says James. Donnchadh Boyle, was the format a success? Is that the feeling in headquarters in Croke Park, that it was a success or not, the round robin?
I think there's an acceptance that there's some element of tweaking required. It was very helter-skelter to the point where there was almost no analysis and nearly no build-up to any game. It was just one game on roll into the next, which sounds great on paper, but I think the 2 finals in particular suffered. I think, in fairness, John, like the GAA should be applauded for moving towards the split season, because it gives, it markets itself as the great organisation of the people and for the people. And in this instance, it actually put the club player, the 99% of its playing membership first, and gave them certainty like they'd never had before in terms of their calendar games. But on the other side, it did lose something. We did lose September. We did lose
August
in terms of the bill. August, and there is, when you talk to people from other sports, and as a colleague of mine put it, he says, like, the GAA are writing themselves out of the agenda by adopting this. But I think they should be applauded for putting club players first, because for a long time, if you were playing club football, all you knew was uncertainty. You didn't know when it's going to play, and everything hinged on how county may get on. So, but that there was a cost to that, and that cost came at just a little bit of a feeling of that it was run off really quickly, and particularly the finals, because, as I say, most other organisations are looking to expand their footprint. They're looking for ways to be in, to be front and centre for longer and better periods of time, and the GAA have gone the opposite direction. So I do think the two finals in particular suffered. I think in time the provincial finals might suffer a little bit as well, because particularly in football, I think when you look around, I think the teams that have their eye on the All-Ireland final will know that the provincial stuff is probably 6 weeks away from a game you need to be winning, or certainly 4 or 5 weeks away from a game you need to be winning, say, in the group stages of the All-Ireland qualifier. So I think we'll see a small tweak next year, and teams will actually chase top spot in the group much more diligently last year, because you've seen week on week playing championship football this year. I think Monaghan were the only team to come through that. So I think you're going to see a small change in emphasis from the teams playing next year, and that could see the provinces being squeezed in terms of its level of interest. And because, the Leinster Championship, Dublin will likely win the Leinster Championship, but it's not of much interest to them. Kerry in Munster the same, Ulster slightly different. But even the teams in Connacht, I would suggest they've all won recently. The three major teams, Galway, Mayo and Roscommon, they've all won a Connacht title recently, so they would be looking elsewhere for their next level of progress. So I think there could be some tweaking, and if that gives it another week, another fortnight, just in the build up to the final or semi-finals, I think that would be welcome. And I still think there's time for the club to be played off as well, without squeezing that window too much.
No, I've no issue with the calendar from a club player's point of view, and they deserve the split season. They deserve the support of the association. You don't want, though, the product that has the mass appeal, that has 1 million people watching, that has 82,300, you could have filled over 100,000 last week for Dublin and Kerry, to be something that we can't breathe around. And I actually think the issue, Donnchadh, is, and Conleith, you can chip in here if you want as well, because I know the Ulster Championship is sacred up north, is that there's too many meaningless games in inter-county season. So do we really need these preliminary competitions, January, February? Do the leagues really, really matter in terms of meaning? And when you think about Mayo and Galway, there was such excitement around them, and they really didn't have any say in the championship whatsoever. So I'd love to see a more expanded championship at the expense of competitions I feel that don't have any meaning.
Yeah, well, just on that, in terms of the Ulster Championship, it still means a lot. There's, for example, even though Tyrone have won the All-Ireland in recent times, an Ulster Championship would still be massive to them, having not won for a number of years. Armagh, Monaghan would love to win it again. Obviously, Derry put so much stock in it. So I think Connacht and Ulster probably is the one that stands alone. But the other bit, and we talk about the split season, and I'm for the split season, but I do think that we need to spend a wee bit of time thinking about county players as well, because the county players now, this weekend, for example, in Derry, Derry's not finished that long. There's club championship this weekend in Derry, and there's a number of Derry senior players that are on holiday because of work commitments and things. So I think while it's great that the club players have certainty, you still want, whenever the county season's over, that your club players or your county players are going back to you and fit to add that value. And I think county players are being worked very, very hard week in and week out, and I think we do need to look at how we protect them, because they are the people, they're the players who people want to come and see, who are paying into matches to come and watch. And I think we're in danger of killing the goose that's laying the golden egg by asking players, for example, Conor Glass, and I'm only going from a Derry context. Conor Glass played in an All-Ireland club final, and 1 week later he played the very first game for Derry, and He's finished a couple of weeks, and now Glen are in the club championship tonight again. And as players that I want to see protected, and how we do it, I'm not 100% sure, but I think the club season probably could take another couple of weeks break to allow those players a wee bit more time.
Yeah, no, well said, Conor. The final word to you, Donnchadh Boyle, just to reflect on all of that. I feel there's too many meaningless games in the inter-county season, and if you cut a lot of the meaningless games out, provinces, okay, if you want to play them maybe start of the year, but maybe just make the Championship a league structure and let it breathe a bit more, and then you might solve this issue, but it won't be solved overnight. We won't solve it.
Yeah. Like the group stage was a funny one because, you know, with going into it, and people sort of realised in the build up to the group stage that there's going to be an awful lot of games to eliminate 4 teams, and that looked right, but it actually played very dramatically in that, you know, there was a 3 or 4 frees on the final day that made big decisions on, you know, Westmeath could have knocked Tyrone out. You know, there was 3 or 4 of those scenarios. Shane Walsh and Galway were in that one as well. So it actually played out quite dramatically the final day. Sorry, again, Conor?
Aidan O'Shea didn't go for the point and he dropped it in.
Aidan O'Shea didn't go for the point, yeah. So that was sort of Super Sunday stuff that day. You know, there was kind of like you could flick one thing to the other, see what was happening, and like it had major ramifications for the All Ireland and who was playing in the following week and stuff like that. And so that was actually quite. But I think, you know, the Super 8s taught us that was probably the exception rather than the rule. The 3 teams coming out of the game, out of the group, was, I suppose, designed to stop dead rubber. But in some way, it took an awful lot of the edge and the jeopardy out of the championship. So you're kind of damned if you do and damned if you don't in that regard. But I do think that because of I do think the provinces will get squeezed, maybe not in Ulster, but I think elsewhere the provinces get squeezed, because if you are trying to secure your Liam or your Sam Maguire place, you're going to go hard after the league to finish as high up in your division as you can. And then maybe the provinces teams could take a breather and then go at it again for the All-Ireland series. So that's where I think maybe the next move will be.
Donnchadh Boyle from the Irish Independent, Conleith Gilligan, ex-Derry player. Lads, great to talk to you. Always love talking Gaelic football. Chat soon.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John.
All right, thanks Donnchadh.
Okay. Bye-bye. The small matter of the All-Ireland Camogie final is on tomorrow, Cork and Waterford, and we'll look ahead to that after this.
Gaelic football on Off the Ball
with AIB, proud sponsors of the GAA Senior Football Championship. Check out #TheToughest for more. This weekend on News Talk, we're celebrating